we had a lot of conversations in the last week with Big Lottery about this because it's causing us a little bit of anxiety as well. And what we've agreed with Lottery is we want to separate out the principle of what's happening here, what they expect to see in the propositions. So these are things we're absolutely agreed about, the principle of the finance aspect of this work. And then the second bit, which is the delivery mechanism, actually what the bank will look like, who's going to hold it and so forth, where we need to do a little bit more discussion. So how we're actually going to do it will be clear with you in about the next 4 to 6 weeks. You don't need to actually implement the bank, of course, until next year, so it's not urgent. But the principle you really need to know now, because you really need to be thinking about money probably in different ways. So some of the things I'm going to repeat. The first is, can't say this enough, is that we're interested in system reform. When I go to the board meetings at Big Lottery, I hear lots of things from the experts, from George Hoskin, from Naomi, and from Kate, about the kinds of things that they really want to see in terms of the kind of preventative activity that might make a difference. And then I hear all the board members, the lottery folks, saying one thing and one thing only: system reform. They do not want to let this money go out of the door unless it changes what happens on the ground. And the clearest barometer, the clearest indicator of system reform is a change in the way local money is spent. So in your propositions, you're going to want to evidence a change in expenditure over the 10-year period. That will be a clear thing that they will be looking for. I had a meeting last week with Scott Greenhalgh, who's the chair of the board, said exactly that. That's what we want to see. That system reform, a change in the way in which money is spent. And that, of course, is about our finance folks who are here. That doesn't mean a number. We're talking about flows of money. Money is not static, it flows. So we want to talk about how flows of money will change over the 10-year period. And as I said earlier on, we're talking about a systematic shift in funding. So not something that will topple over after 2 or 3 years, but something that will endure over the 10 years of the investment period. Not a pilot. You might have pilots in there to test some ideas, but the long-term goal is a systematic change in the way in which money is spent. And part of the thing that we will be able to help you there in thinking about this is the whole area of what we call system dynamics. System dynamics are the primary reason why we're struggling to make things like social investment bonds, to make payment by results work within public systems. Because public systems have their own dynamics. They're like a balloon. If you push the balloon in, the balloon comes out the other end. If you dry up a source of children, if you put a parenting program, I've had good experience of this in our sites in the past, put a great parenting program in place in children's centres that reduces conduct disorder, and therefore you've got a reduction in the number of kids coming forward to child protection or to foster care. Fantastic. What does the system do? It adapts, and it finds those kids from elsewhere. It sucks them in from elsewhere. So you really need to think about system dynamics if you're really going to change things systematically. I always tend to think about this, when people on the outside look at systems, they say, I really hate that commissioner. She's driving me crazy. It's like named as an individual. But what we see when we look at public systems are dynamics that sometimes make the best people do some really stupid things. So we have to be able to, we're going to change systems, you have to be able to control some of these dynamics. So we can certainly give you a lot of help and expertise to think about that. We want you to think broadly about the sources of finance that you will want to draw into this. Your number one starting point has to be the money in existing public systems. This is where the big bucks are. If you were trying to get a business off the ground, You want to go to the banks that have got the most money to get behind your proposition. In this context, the people with the most money are the people in public systems. The people that hold the £5,000 per child per annum that's being spent on kids. And you want to get their backing, their investment in the process. You also have philanthropic money. You've got the big lottery money. That's what it is when it comes down to it. It's philanthropic funds in order to be able to get things kick-started, to get things moving along. Many of you who were here a few weeks ago will have heard from a group of social finance people. You've got social impact bonds. You've got payment by results. You've got things that don't bring that much money in, but they get a lot of engagement. We've been talking to a group called Community Shares. You can Google Community Shares. It's part of the co-op movement. If you're in Manchester, you can go and see them because they're on your doorstep. What they're doing is using social finance in a different way. They're getting local people to buy shares in local things. The most obvious way is when a post office is closing down or when a pub is closing down, the local people buy the pub, they buy a share in it. Why can't they buy a share in an early years centre? Why can't they buy a share in a playground? These are things that you might want to think about. So think about your investment coming from a broad range of sources. The thing I want you to think about most importantly of all is when you've got this money together, when you've got your system money together, maybe your social finance money together, when you've got your money coming in from big lottery, think about it as an investment. And one of the things we want to change is when people do a social impact bond, because of the people backing the bond, they think about it as an investment and they're looking for a return on investment. When you think about public sector money, you don't think of it as an investment, but we want you to think of this public sector money as an investment. And the return on that investment is twofold. The most important return is better outcomes for children, better developmental outcomes for children, measurably so. That's what you're spending the money on. That's what you want to see as a return on this investment. And then secondly, possibly, if you can control the system dynamics, you might look for an economic return on that investment, where by virtue of having reduced pressure on the child protection system, by virtue of having more children ready for school, by virtue of there being fewer children committing crimes, then you produce an economic return. And for those of you who are interested, on Wednesday, on the 18th of September, if you go to our website, you'll see a new tool, partly supported by Manchester and Birmingham City Councils, which is called Investing in Children. And it provides the cost-benefit analyses on a whole range of interventions. Not so many in the early years, but a whole range of interventions. And there are documents on there that explain why we can get economic returns on investment and what that looks like in our area. I'm not so much interested, to be quite honest, in the economic stuff. I really care about the outcome stuff. But lots of people are interested in the economic stuff, and if it can help you, then by all means use it. The word that we're injecting into this, with Big Lottery, into philanthropy generally in this country, it's a word from the United States, it's a word that you will want to use in your propositions, is leverage. What Big Lottery are looking for, like American philanthropy, is leverage on the way public sector funds are made. We work in the United States, we're working in Providence, Rhode Island at the moment with Annie E. Casey Foundation. They don't put money into a site unless the site puts in a lot of money of its own. That's the deal. And that's what the deal is here. You want to look for leverage. And the strength of the leverage is going to be one of the ways in which the assessors of the proposition are going to, it's one of the indicators that they're going to look like. They're going to look for. You want to do your sums? Well, You know, I kind of think about this. In my ward, where I live in London, in my ward, there are 50 children from 0 to 4 born each year. There's 250 in the 0 to 4. Sorry, there's 50 children born each year in my ward. So there's 250 children 0 to 4. We're going to have to do the sums on this. We reckon there's about, we think you're going to find there's been about £1,800 per child per year in those early years. We spend more money later on. So that's the amount of money that's floating around in my ward. So I'm thinking there's probably, in the 4-ward area around me, there's probably about £1.8 million being spent on children, about 1,000 children from conception to 4 years of age. You want to be clear about those sums. You want to know how much money is knocking around, because that's the money that you're going to be levering as part of this process. So the question for those of you who couldn't hear is that I talk on average over the life term £5,000 per child from 0 to 18, but the proportion, what is it, Louise, 79% of those funds on average go into education. The question is, will we be able to shift that money around? And so there's two aspects of that. One is, if you're going to get schools to invest, what you have to do, you have to go and talk to schools and get them to invest. You have to make the case. So you've got to get them to the table. Because if they're going to put money in, and I think you really want them to put money in, you have to make the case that the work that you're going to do from 0 to 3 is going to produce kids that's going to make their job a lot easier. And the second aspect is here, we only need relatively small shifts, we think, in expenditure, 2 to 5% to make a difference. It's not easy. These folks here from Renfrew, folks in Perth and Kinross have just made a 2% proposition recently. It's hard to do, but it's not impossible, and it's not everything. But you're absolutely right. A lot of this money's tied up, and you've really got to know where the money is to be able to look around the edges. And you've got to make the case for why people should invest. Why should a head teacher, who now controls most of that budget, why should they put their money into this proposition? You've got to make the case.
It's also, I mean, in the very pregnancy in the first years, most of the money's in health. So it's around how we work with our GPs.
Exactly. So again, you've got to engage with them. You've got to make the case. You've got to bring them to the table. You can't tell people what to do. You're on a journey learning how some of this stuff works. You've got to bring them on this journey as well. How are you going to use that money? You're going to think about that. There are different propositions that we can set down for you. One might be to use the money from Big Lottery, for example, to test propositions locally, and then to use your money, to have your money in a pot to invest in those propositions that clearly are working. So you ask them to do the testing, to do the testing part of it. You don't have that free money available to do really high quality testing. So you use that the lottery money to play that part in leverage. You might think about this in terms of investing in programs. I'm hesitating here because I don't want to say Family Nurse Partnership again, but it is a good example of this. So Family Nurse Partnership, on average, costs about £6,000, and on average, I want to say it has an economic return of £18,000. When does that economic return come? And it's solid. This is absolutely conservative and solid. When does the £18,000 start to come back? After about year 8 or year 9. So maybe you want to use the Big Lottery money to make the investment while you wait for the return. They won't want return, so you can invest in the loss-making years in order to take the gain in the gain-making years. You can think about that in terms of scale as well. We have been working in some authorities trying to scale parenting programs in children's centres. where we've had really nice results of parenting centres, or parenting programmes, I beg your pardon, in children's, parenting programmes in children's centres for 3-year-olds. And we've done that where we've had 60-odd children's centres, and we've done it in 9 centres. If you want to go to 60, it's hell of a lot of money up front to scale up. And you don't have that money, free cash, so you use the lottery money in order to be able to get to scale up, and then you then gradually reduce other services in order to be able to make a systematic change, shift in expenditure. But you want to be clear about what this investment strategy looks like. And while you're doing that, just as a clue, one of the things they'll look like, they're going to be looking for graphs about what the overall expenditure is, 0 to 3, what the overall expenditure is in the local authority on children, what that looks like over the next few years. And if your graph isn't going down, if your overall expenditure on kids isn't going down, it's not going in the right direction. That's what it's going to look like. We are going to be spending less money, whether you're left, whether you're right, whether, maybe, no, if you're left or if you're right, it doesn't matter who's in power over the next 10 years, we are going to be spending less money on public sector services. So your model of the money is going to have to factor that in, and you're going to have to demonstrate that and evidence it. The next point is absolutely critical, which is we want to talk about real money. I know all of you in this room, I don't know you personally, but I know all of you in this room because I spent most of my life working with people like you, and you are absolutely skilled at making a case about virtual expenditure of money. Oh, we'll shift a few bit of resources over here, we'll do this, we'll do that. We never see it. We want to see real money on the table. It may be real money on the table in 3 years' time, but it has to be a real commitment. Big Lottery are going to want to see cash, real cash, out of a public system in a separate pot that is going to be spent on the things that you want it to be spent on. If you're talking about, all the wishy-washy stuff that you're all expert at, I don't know if it's going to wash. It might wash, it might not. Maybe they're not as fly as I am, but you know as well as I do what you do. I've seen it, and it's fine, it's great, it's good fun, it gets you through the day, but it doesn't improve outcomes for kids. And you've really got to think about that if you're going to make a difference.
Can I just ask a question? There's government guidance coming out about real costs of money going into real integrated services. And some of the public bodies are bound by that kind of legislation. So again, it feels like there's a balancing act to manage here. Because I absolutely get what you say, and what the lodge is saying you want. But there's some opportunities and restrictions at the moment, what can actually happen. So have those discussions included that dimension?
They have, and of course you remind me in saying that there are some things that you have to factor into this, which is, the lottery money can't be spent on existing statutory services. So when you're putting your proposition together, you have to think about how the lottery money will be spent as compared to the lever money, how that's going to be spent. And yes, we have to be legal. We can't break the law. So you need to be able to be, there will be people in lottery who, when they look at the propositions, will be checking to make sure the things that you say you're going to say actually can happen. So yeah, you have to work within that. The thing I would say is that this place-based reform process is growing. Governments are trying to be more and more flexible around this. I know that this is not a party political issue, that the Labour Party in particular is very interested in these. My friend here looks just like John Cruddas. I've never seen anybody look just like when he was in the room. And I've been having conversations with John Cruddas, and he's very interested in these sorts of issues. So it doesn't matter what the political party is in the next administration, if it's left or it's right, there's going to be more of this place-based shifting around of money, different kind of investment strategies. Okay, 2 points to close. One is saying I have to close up. The mechanism we're working on, we're working with partners. I'll be just straight up with you. This is why we've had a problem. We have a clear structure for doing this. We generally, when we work with a site, We adapt it locally, we just sit down and figure it out according to local structures. We can't do that 15 times over, so we want to be able to provide you a single structure, which you may or may not use. I know Lewisham are working on this anyway, so you may have something that does the job perfectly well. You don't need to use what we do, what we offer, and do it well. But because what we're dealing with is, once you get the leverage, and once you get the lottery money in, there are hundreds of millions of pounds floating around. And once that starts to happen, we have to do a lot more on our due diligence when providing you with a tool. So we're having conversations with people that are able to do this. And the things that we're saying to them are, first of all, it has to be locally facing. We don't want your money going into something called the International Finance Bank, which you can draw out of when you want. It's going to have something on it which says the Lewisham Early Intervention Bank, or whatever you want to call it. It's going to be the Leicester, Early Years Consortium pot, whatever you want to kind of call it. But it's going to be locally facing. That's the first thing. It's going to be legally robust. And this is the kind of the bit that we have to get right over the next few years. Is just making sure that all the legal structures around this are absolutely intact. And my colleague from this table asked the question about what's possible and what isn't, is going into that. That's being drawn into that question. The third bit is that it has to have a safe return. Any money that's brought together like this, you would expect an economic return on the investment while the money's being held. You put money aside, and then it's going to be invested later on. Well, there has to be a return on that investment, but we don't want them investing in Iceland. We need them to be investing in conservatively, so the money is available as and when it is needed. And finally, the money has to be owned by the local governance structure. So the local governance structure have to be able to spend that money as and when they need it. It's just a bank to hold that money until the local government structure want to spend it. So, in conclusion, I just wanted to say one more thing actually about the money, which Andrew Morris would want me to say, which is the thing that they fear more than anything else is Tesco. Yeah, you give a lot of money to a local, give 30 million in Lewisham, and Lewisham open Tesco, and all the local shops close down. That's what they fear more than anything else. So I think that's a really nice metaphor for thinking, you want to use this money to build local shops. You want to build the local infrastructure. You don't want to knock everything out there that's down by virtue of a big investment of external funds. We don't want Tesco. That's what Andrew Morris would say if he was standing here.
What if Tesco's rubbish? So what if the evidence states that actually the locally based structure isn't good enough, and therefore you need Tesco?
Well, I would think about that in the following ways, which is if you can find Tesco. The thing about Tesco is if they decide to come into your area, they know how to do it. They just come in and they scale, boom, 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 boom. That's why they're making billions. Most of us don't know how to do that. The second thing is when they come in, of course, they have a lot of fantastic data about local need. They don't come, Tesco's aren't cookie cutter. They know, for example, if they go into an area where there's a Bangladeshi population, there are things in that shop that serve the Bangladeshi population. And they know that real time. They know it day by day. They know what goes off the shelf is what goes into the shelf, and they test things and move things along. So even in Tesco, you've got a local dimension to it. But the thing that Tesco doesn't have is that local buy-in. I mean, they do employ and train local people, which is a benefit, but they don't have that local buy-in. And when we're working, it's up to you to decide how to do this, but when we're working, we're always looking for innovation, which is evidence-based or science-based, that you can then look to local providers to provide. You have to provide the training, you have to build the infrastructure with them, but you ask local organisations to do different things. Maybe they're doing things at the moment that are completely ineffective, and you've got something you think is more effective. But train them, develop them to do the things that you think will make a difference, and carry them along as part of that process. in conclusion, real money, not virtual money, fully sharing the risk and responsibility for that money. The community folks and the system folks sharing, it's a risk, it's an investment, it can go wrong. How many of you start off something, you say, I'm doing this, and you're absolutely sure it's going to work? You're going to have a portfolio of things that you're going to do. Some of them will fail. I know they will fail because we've been doing this work for so long now. I would say on average about 1 in 2 of the things that we've had investments in have failed. They were fantastic ideas. They had the best science behind them. They had the best people behind them. They had good local commitment, but they failed because they just weren't good ideas. They were good ideas at the time we thought about them, but they weren't good ideas when we actually came to implement them. That's the nature of the world. So you're sharing that risk between communities and systems for the investment. Transparency and accountability. Being absolutely clear what the money will be spent on and making sure the money is spent in the way you said it was going to be spent. Making other adaptations if necessary, but being clear about those adaptations. And then finally, where appropriate, making sure that you have a structure that can manage the economic return. Because in some cases, you are going to be putting in investments in the conception to 3 area that will generate economic returns. You'll be able to manage the system dynamics, and you want a structure that can not only pay out money, but it can also receive money, and that money can then be used for further investments in prevention in the future.